Welcome to Access Asia. I'm Yuka Hoye. This week, as the US-Israeli war on Iran continues, we take a look at how Asian nations are reeling from its fallout. 3 years ago, China brokered a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Now, with Tehran firing on Riyadh, along with all other Gulf Cooperation Council states, Beijing is walking a diplomatic tightrope. Since the start of the war, the Chinese government has stayed relatively quiet, although it has condemned the attacks on Iran and the killing of its leader. Well, for more, let's cross now to London to speak with Kerry Brown, Director of the Lao China Institute at King's College. Professor Brown, great to have you with us.
Hi, good to see you.
Now, first of all, why has China stayed quiet on this? I mean, what are its calculations?
Well, I think like everyone else, China wants to know what the game plan is for this attack. It doesn't have any more clarity than a lot of other people, including, it seems, the American administration about where all of this is going to land. It had some interest in Iran. It got something like, I think, 12%, 12 to 17% of its, kind of energy from its oil from Iran. But these are not insignificant, but they're not super significant. And it had relatively good relations with Iran. But I don't think that it could be seen as a sort of natural ally of Iran. I mean, culturally, politically, all sorts of reasons why it's not totally aligned. So I don't think that it has enough skin in this game to really feel like it's going to stick its neck out. It will not want this to continue indefinitely and create instability because it has significant interests elsewhere in the Middle East and in the region generally. So I think that's why it's being very prudent at the moment. Very finally, Mr. Trump is meant to be going to Beijing at the end, I believe, of this month. So that is China's priority at the moment, working out what to do about that relationship, the bilateral relationship, rather than a kind of external issues as the Middle East and Iran particularly is.
Yeah, as you've just mentioned, even though the West generally considers China to be an ally of Iran, but they're not allies in a conventional sense, there's no security pact. So what's the strategy here then for China?
Well, I think China is an opportunist. I don't think it would want to directly engage, but obviously Russia has significant interests in this too. China may well support Russian efforts to get involved and to push back and maybe even to support Iran. But I don't think at the end that China wants. So what China doesn't want is a pro-Western, complete, kind of almost like a kind of a country that belongs to the United States. It doesn't want Iran to become, sort of a possession of the United States and its allies. But nor does it want an Iran that is completely imploding. It wants something in between. So a new regime, but one which is still antagonistic to the United States, but functional. I think that would be what suits China.
Officially, it hasn't been selling weapons to Iran for 2 decades, right?
Yes, not officially. Who knows what happens unofficially? I mean, the claim is that China supplies all sorts of things behind the background, as with Russia. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, China certainly had investments in Iran. The Iranian leader, the late Ayatollah Khamenei, did his last ever foreign visit was in 1988 or 1989 to China. Then he never traveled abroad again. So, I mean, they had kind of relatively good diplomatic links, but a theocracy and a communist party, kind of system are not likely to be terribly aligned. Deep down, they're going to be convenience partners rather than strategic partners.
And beyond economic interests, does China have reasons to be worried about what's happening inside Iran, given that the war comes just a few weeks after massive protests there?
I think China will be concerned about a Middle East which seems to be imploding. It will be concerned about a United States which seems to be acting increasingly unpredictably. And it will be concerned about what if the United States makes such a mess of this that for pure self-interest, China will need to get more deeply involved? For all the claims that China is assertive and increasingly kind of active globally, that's true to a point, but I don't think China wants to start taking responsibility for security issues, even if a void opens up. And in the Middle East, it has interests in Saudi Arabia, it has interests, for energy and for investments, for finance across this region. It won't want high levels of instability that threaten those, but nor will it want to wade in and expose itself at a time when it has many domestic issues. And of course, its focus is in the region, and there's, kind of the South China Sea, and in particular Taiwan. Will China use this as an opportunity to do something on Taiwan? I think it's very unlikely because, like everyone else, China knows that the world is in an incredibly unstable position at the moment, and that does not serve China's interests short to medium term, because it could all kind of fall on China's head if the United States just continues to act in such a unilateral and unpredictable way.
Well, Professor Kerry Brown, thank you so much for your analysis. I'm afraid we're running out of time here, but thank you again.
Very much.
Now, behind iconic luxury hotels in wealthy Gulf monarchies are millions of migrant workers, a large number of them from Asia. The war has thrown their lives and those of their families back home into turmoil. From Nepal, Bangladesh, and the Philippines, the stakes are high as their economies depend on those working overseas. Kemi Knight takes a look.
A few meters away from the US Embassy in Manila, activists have come to condemn the war in Iran. The Foreign Ministry estimates more than 2.4 million Filipinos currently work in the Middle East. They're now in the line of fire as Iran exchanges strikes with the US and Israel.
This crisis is not just limited in the Middle East. It will affect many countries, especially the Philippines. We are concerned about the situation of migrant workers in the Middle East.
The Filipino government says it's prepared to order a mandatory repatriation if the conflict escalates. But such a mission is complex and costly. For now, authorities have limited themselves to effectively banning the deployment of newly hired Filipino workers. With migrant workers mostly from Asia and Southeast Asia accounting for 40% of the Gulf's labour force, their repatriation could have devastating effects for health, construction or household help sectors. Meanwhile, migrant workers' remittances fuel household incomes back home, providing nearly 9% of the Philippines' GDP and up to a quarter of Nepal's. That means any prolonged labour disruption in the Gulf could quickly strain these economies. These Bangladeshi workers had returned home to Dhaka for a few days, only to find themselves stranded at the airport on their way back due to the closure of airspace.
Of course we're worried about our safety, but we send remittances home. We go abroad because our families need it. And there's nothing we can do here. We can only earn a living there, so we have to leave.
Many of them are in low-income work and often lack adequate employment safeguards. During previous conflicts in the Middle East, a large number of migrant workers were abandoned by employers, often without wages or travel documents.
Among the countries dependent on migrant workers are India and Pakistan. Remittances make up roughly 10% of Pakistan's economy, and while for India the share is lower, at about 3.5%, it's larger than that of its exports to the United States. Because of their proximity to the region, the conflict has larger geopolitical implications for the South Asian nations than for others further east. Now, to get things into perspective, let's bring in Christine Fair, Professor in Security Studies at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start in Pakistan. The war has put the country in a particularly tight spot, hasn't it? It has no formal diplomatic ties with Israel, has had a complicated relationship with Iran, and been forging closer ties with Gulf states.
And it's had a complicated relationship with the United States as well. I think the biggest problem confronting Pakistan is that it gets most of its fuel from supplies that pass through the Straits of Hormuz. And 80% of the global fuel that's consumed passes through the Straits of Hormuz. And so this has put a lot of pressure on Pakistan's very precarious economy. It's in discussions with the IMF to see what kind of workarounds might be available. But really, this is the biggest issue. It doesn't get any formal fuel from Iran, but through smuggling networks, because of course Pakistan has a fairly large border with Iran, about 14% of Pakistan's overall consumption is of Iranian fuel. But the biggest issue, in my estimation, is the closure of the Straits of Hormuz.
Now, that border area between Iran and Pakistan is the restive Balochistan province, where security forces on both sides of the border have battled militancy. If the leadership in Tehran were to collapse, could it pose a new threat to Pakistan?
So that's a really tough one, because the dynamics of the conflict are really quite different on each side of the border. So what we might expect to see on the Iran side of the border is, basically the Baloch are really rebelling against two issues. They're rebelling against discrimination based upon their ethnic identity, and they're also rebelling based upon their sectarian Sunni identity. And of course, Iran, being a revolutionary state, espouses Shia Islam. So it's possible that the breakdown in authority might give a fill-up to those Baloch insurgents on Iran's restive in Sistan-Balochistan province. But it's not an existential crisis to the Iranian state in the same way that the Balochistan crisis in Pakistan is an existential crisis. In the Pakistan Balochistan, the reason why they're primarily rebelling is Chinese exploitation, failure to devolve to the state, failure to invest in the state, the failure to create job opportunities for the Baloch. So the nature of the disputes are really quite different depending upon which side of the border you look at.
And Pakistan, of course, is also facing intensifying clashes with Afghanistan's Taliban rulers.
Yeah, so this really puts that entire border, Pakistan's entire western border under pressure. It is, as you noted, fighting what Pakistan calls an open war with Afghanistan. And as is also well known, Pakistan's eastern border is under a lot of pressure from its security competition with India. So Pakistan is, I would say, somewhat accustomed to living with hot borders. I don't really see this Iran crisis putting an unbearable pressure upon the state. There's a lot of other pressures that are much more significant for the Pakistani state.
Now, Pakistan itself is nuclear armed. Are there worries then that it could become Israel's next target and be deemed an existential threat for Israel?
So this is certainly something that Pakistanis have always worried about. And there were several decades ago rumors that Israel was targeting some of Pakistan's nuclear infrastructure. But it actually, in recent years, under different guises, Pakistan has actually floated having some kind of a relationship with Israel. So I don't think there's any, and of course the Pakistanis are a sort of client of the United States. So I don't personally think there's any significant risk of the Israeli state targeting Pakistan's nuclear infrastructure, although it is something that Pakistanis have frequently opined about.
Christine Fair, thank you so much for your analysis. And that's it for this edition.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And that's it for this edition of Access Asia. Thanks for watching, and do stay tuned. There's more to come.